mitzvah. However, the lighting of the Hanukkah candles even begins before that. Why? Because it's a custom. Like in Shul, for example, where the lighting of Hanukkah takes place in the format of the Roivam Hadras Melech, with a lot of people being present there, and this adds to the glory of the mitzvah. And this is done already on Erev Hanukkah afternoon. In other words, on the day that on that evening Hanukkah is going to begin, and that afternoon already, we have the lighting of the Neresh Hanukkah. Together with the lighting comes the reciting of the bracha. The bracha is of great importance to the mitzvah, the Rebbe goes on, because the Rebbe continues, it's explained in Svarim that every mitzvah is composed of machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh. There are the kavanas which we have, the good intentions, why we do a mitzvah. Then there is the speaking about the mitzvah, or in some cases it may apply the bracha which is made for the mitzvah, like in this particular case, that together with lighting the Neresh Hanukkah there is a bracha which is recited. Then follows the ma'aseh, the main union of lighting the Neresh Hanukkah. Naturally, ha-ma'aseh hu ha'ikar. What's most important is the ma'aseh. For if one will be in a position that he will have, as it's explained in Hasidus in many places, he may have the best intentions, he may have the best machshavas, he may have the best kavanas. However, if he will be lacking the fulfillment of the mitzvah, the payol, then the mitzvah is not done. One may have all of the best kavanas. However, if he will not do the mitzvah, he may even have the dibur, which goes together with the mitzvah. He'll have the machshava, he'll have the dibur, which is the thought and the saying. And even should one go ahead and recite a bracha. However, if he's lacking the fulfilling of lighting the Neresh Hanukkah, that means he has not done the mitzvah. So from this we see that the best way to perform the mitzvah of Neresh Hanukkah is when all the inyanim come together. There's a combination of machshava, which is the kavanah. Together with the kavanah mitzvah is the dibur as well, which in this case would be the bracha that's recited on the mitzvah. And when all this is followed up with ma'aseh, with the lighting of the Neresh Hanukkah, that's considered that we have done the mitzvah in its completion the way it is required to be done. But again, let us not forget, ha-ma'aseh hu ha'ikar. Naturally, a mitzvah min ha-mufcha, the way to do the mitzvah in the best way is when it's composed of all the three components. But the main thing, what counts is ma'aseh. So when we're talking about the inyan of Hanukkah, Hanukkah has many inyanim within itself. But the major inyan of Hanukkah is the idea of lighting the candles of Hanukkah. And this begins, just as mentioned earlier, even before we really enter into the Yom Tov. Rebbe went on and pointed out an inyan in Hanukkah, which he said is something which is extremely obvious, and anyone sees it, and it's obvious to everyone. And at the same time, the Rebbe says he hasn't heard or seen or hasn't seen it being mentioned in Svarim, that anybody should really pay attention to this point in the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. What is it? Rebbe goes ahead. We light Neresh Hanukkah in a way of mahadrim min ha-mahadrim. Rebbe says it many times that min hadin is sufficient. Neresh Hanukkah is sufficient that every night of Hanukkah to light only one Hanukkah candle. However, we Tirzach, as the Gemara refers to this, mahadrim min ha-mahadrim, to fulfill the mitzvah in the best way, and that is the way we do it, to add on every night one more candle as we did the previous night. So in other words, we begin with one, and from this one we add up at the end of Hanukkah lighting those Hanukkah candles. Correct. And not only for one person lighting for the entire family, in other words, not, as the Gemara uses the expression, Nei Rishu Beisai, but everybody, all males in the family, light Hanukkah light in this way. However, the Rebbe says, for example, the first night, when we light one licht, it was never seen that a person should take just one cup and put this one cup of oil down. The common practice is that we have a menorah, and this menorah has room for 8 candles, and on the first night we light 1. On the second night we light 2. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, in today's Haftarah, which we said today, so in today's Haftarah we refer to psukim that have the shaychus to Hanukkah, and the psukim talking about Hanukkah also have an expression, menorah shehet kula. In other words, we talk about the menorah as a whole. So we see that the common practice is not to take one candle, two candles, three candles, but all the menorahs are erected in a form that they have room for eight. But it comes the first night we only utilize one space, it comes the second night we utilize two spaces, and so on. And the Rebbe says this is very obvious to the people that light the candle. Not only is it obvious to the people that light the candles, but the Rebbe says that even in any Yehudi, even a non-Jew, who passes by, the whole idea of Hanukkah is the idea for some and it should be seen by everyone. So any bypasser, even a non-Jew that passes by, also notices this, that the menorah is one complete menorah. It's a menorah Zohar Kula, and in addition to this menorah, one night we utilize one part, the second night a second part, and so forth. The Rebbe went on to explain the idea of menorah, as the Gemara uses the expression, mitzvasa mitzatisha achama ad kalya rigla de talmudoi. It means the Gemara is discussing the halachic part of the time when the Hanukkah candles have to be lit, and the Gemara explains that the time the Hanukkah candles have to be lit is from sunset mitzatisha achama ad the kalya rigla de talmudoi. Part of the pshat in the Gemara is Talmudoi was a group of people that they would be walking late in the street. And the Gemara says, as long as these people are still walking in the street, we are allowed to light the Hanukkah candle. However, Chassidus gives a much deeper explanation on this entire inyan. Chassidus explains that what is the inyan of Ner Hanukkah? The whole idea of Hanukkah is to bring light into the outside, to bring spiritual light into the street. And that is why Hanukkah stresses so much the importance of Pirtumei Nisa, that it should be publicized, and it's done at the door, or it's done on the windowsill, meaning that it's the idea of Hanukkah is to come out into the outside street and bring light, bring Yiddishkeit, Neil Mitzvah, the Torah. What do we mean when we use the term light? We don't mean physical light. We mean Torah and Mitzvahs that are compared to light, Neil Mitzvah, the Torah, and bring this spiritual light into the street. The idea of Hanukkah is from sunset. In other words, the sun reflects the idea of sun is lichtigkeit. However, when we stressing the idea of it means there is no sun, there is no light, there is no spiritual light. In other words, it's a time of sunset. The time of day, what the Gemara says. The Chassidus explains Talmud is spelled Taf, Reis, Men, Vav, Dalet. So if it takes these letters, it's composed as the same word as Moired, one that rebels. In other words, the idea of Hanukkah is that it should reach even to the person who can be categorized as one who fits into the category of a Moired. He rebels. At this time, he's currently still rebelling as far as Torah and Mitzvahs are concerned. So the idea of Hanukkah is to reach to these people as well, and bring the light and the message of Hanukkah, the Neil Mitzvah, the Torah, to these people. However, the Rebbe continues, we have to approach it and do this idea of Hanukkah in a way of step by step. It cannot be done at once. If we are involved in the inyan of Hanukkah, we have to be involved in an inyan that has a shaykhus to Hanukkah. Incidentally, the Rebbe mentioned that there's a sefer from the Miketz Rebbe, which is called Chazarah. And the Miketz Rebbe Chazarah, the whole sefer primarily is to discuss the inyan of Hanukkah. And right away in the introduction to the Chazarah, he talks a lot about the inyan of Hanukkah, and at the same time he's also masbir the inyan of Purim. Because Hanukkah and Purim are two separate inyanim. It's two separate miracles, as well as two separate inyanim and ruchnius. But the Rebbe says, interesting enough, this has a source in Yiddish. And we find something very interesting in the Rambam. The Rambam discusses the halachas of each yontif in a separate halacha. It comes to the dinim of Hanukkah and Purim, the Rambam puts it into one heading. Hilchas Hanukkah Purim. First he discusses the inyan of Hanukkah, then he discusses the inyan of Purim, but it's remarkable that he puts it all into one halacha, into one chapter. The Rebbe says, It's something which requires an explanation. The Rebbe didn't get into it, but he mentioned it. He says it's something which is very obvious. Because the Rambam, just like he divided many other inyanim, he could have divided this inyan as well. Of course, discuss the halachas that pertain to Chanukah, and later he would discuss the halachas that pertain to Purim. What was the reason that led the Rambam to combine Hilchos Chanukah and Purim and put it into one halacha? The Rebbe mentioned this by person, and he didn't get involved in explaining the reason for it. However, getting back to our inyan, the Rebbe continues. The idea of Chanukah is to bring lichtigkeit, more mitzvah, the Torah oil, to the most darkest spiritual corner possible. When it comes the first day of Chanukah, we fulfill the mitzvah in the sense that we know we still have a lot to accomplish. We still have 7 more days ahead of us. In other words, we see one big menorah. We're room for the first candle. That's the candle that we're lighting. However, we know that we're not fulfilling our mission this first night. We know we still have a long goal ahead of us. And this is what we are told at the very beginning as we go into the Yom Tov of Chanukah. A youth has to know that we can't accomplish, we can't illuminate spiritually the entire world at once. It's impossible. We have to go in a format of step by step. We can't do things too fast. We have to go step by step on the spiritual ladder. That is why we do not light all the 8 candles at once, but we go in the format of Mailim B'Kodesh. We go higher and higher when it comes to Kedusha. We go step by step. But together with it, we are told, you should know that this is not, you're not going to stop at this step. You should know that comes the next night, you have to go a higher step, and a 3rd step, and a 4th step, until you reach the final 8th highest madrega. However, this is all shown to us and introduced to each and every year at the very first night, that right away we ought to know that the whole concept of Chanukah is a menorah. It's not just one candle that we're lighting tonight, it's a menorah of kula. And this menorah of kula is composed of 8 different components. And ultimately we will have to light all the 8, meaning what the pshat in Ruchni is, ultimately we will have to go from a higher level to higher level, going further and further, bringing the light of more mitzvah, the Torah, to more and more people. However, how is it given to us if we should approach it step by step? And the Rebbe went on, before discussing that, when it comes to various inyanim, one can sit back and say, well, minig avosenu biyadenu, and we will do what our parents did. And maybe if our parents didn't do these minhagim, we shouldn't do these minhagim. So first of all, our parents were much better than we are. Our parents and ancestors way back, they definitely, even if it's this particular Indian which we may be talking about, they did not adhere to. However, in general, as far as Torah mitzvahs and as far as Yerushalayim, they did appear much better than we did. And here the Rebbe spoke very strongly about Indian as putting on Rabbeinu Tamston. Rebbe said in Shulchan Aruch, it's discussed that he should put on Rabbeinu Tamston, one who was a Yerushalayim be'emes, who really had, the Rebbe said he should put on Rabbeinu Tamston. Obviously, the Rebbe was referring to some people that are community people and they occupy such of a position. The Rebbe says when it comes to evaluate their salary, then they look at upon themselves that they're definitely Yerushalayim and they're worthy of being the Rav and they're worthy of being compensated accordingly. However, when in Yonim that a Yerushalayim should do, is these in Yonim are demanded from them, talking right now about the union of putting down Rabbeinu Tamston, these are in Yonim that are neglected. And the Rebbe stressed it very strongly, spoke about the union, the importance nowadays that everyone should put on Rabbeinu Tamston. Then later, the Rebbe was talking that right now we are in a position of Golus. The famous expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe that we are waiting that the Rebbe should bring the walls of Golus. In other words, the Golus to take an end. After Golus, we come to Geula. Because if we look carefully, Golus and Geula are composed of the same letter. Gimel Lamed Vesta. You want to write Geula, all you have to do is you add in an aleph. This aleph, the Rebbe says, makes the difference between Golus and Geula. What's the pshat? Aleph reminds us on Alukah Shalom. It reminds us on the Rabbeinu Shalom. If we get associated properly with Alukah Shalom, this will turn over from Golus and make the Golus into Geula. And the Rebbe went on that the flower, the Ian of Chanukah, is Neil Mitzvah, the Torah. Hanukkah is the meaning of light. We find very strongly Torah is compared to Meir, to a candle, and mitzvah is compared to Meir, and Torah is compared to Eir. And that is why in the Yom Tov of Hanukkah we find a very strong stress in the Yom that has a cycle to Torah. First of all, we see that in the Allah Nissim that we recite, immediately we say, what did the Yevanim want to do? What was their goal? They have Shicham Torah Secha. And as Chassidus stresses, what like Shicham Torah Secha. What the Yevanim intended really was that the Yidden should disassociate themselves with the fact that they're learning the Rebbe's Torah. It's the same meaning the Rebbe says, there's a Gemara, the Gemara says, why was the Yisrael destroyed and why did we lose the Beit HaMikdash? The Gemara says, because Yidden did not make Birchas HaTorah when they learned Torah. So it's explained in the Ram and Chassidus explained it. Ba'arichos, what's the pshat? They didn't make Birchas HaTorah before they went ahead to learn. I mean, as long as they were learning, what could we care whether they made Birchas HaTorah or they didn't make Birchas HaTorah? What's the content of Birchas HaTorah? In Birchas HaTorah we express that the Rebbe is the one that gave the Torah. We realize that the Rebbe says, Baruch Atah Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalom, he is the one that is the nation of Torah. Memela. I feel a Baruch HaTorah Tchilah the pshat. We didn't learn Torah, however they didn't realize that this is Torah Hashem. They looked at Torah as the Chachma of the Torah, something intelligent, something knowledgeable, extremely intelligent. However, it has no title for the Rebbe. This is the very same what the Yevanim intended. What the Yevanim wanted to accomplish was, Ra'askichon Torah Secha. You didn't want to learn Torah, they didn't mind. The Yevanim they themselves were also a Sophic nation, and they didn't mind if Yidden were involved in intellectual inyanim. However, Torah Secha, the Torah has a shaykhus to the Rebbe said, this is what the Yidden want Yidden to do. Memela, so that is, as we see in the Yom Tov of Hanukkah, that the meaning of Torah is extremely major. Very tremendous way, the meaning of Torah. And that is why the message was reflected also in Shemin. As discussed last week, that Shemin also refers to Torah. There's madregas in Torah that are defined as a madrega of Shemin. Just like what I spoke last week, the Gemara says, Ma hazayis hazek sheketzer meisei. At the meisei of Shamnei, when you take the olive and you crush him, that is when you get good results and the olive produces oil. The very same is Benegei Torah. Benegei Torah is also in a form that you're daita and that's also common. If a person, in other words, really gets himself involved, spiritual sense idea of expressing oneself, that is when he has satisfactory results in Torah. Very same, the Rebbe referred to the Gemara says, have a goyla lemokan Torah. If one wants to really succeed in learning, he has to wander away and go in Galas, wander to an outside mokan Torah, and if he was not staying in his home and in his home conveniences, but if he goes into Galas and fulfills the Havegorah Lamakan Torah, that is when one will succeed. So this is the same idea as Ma Hazayis Hazek, to make the Yashamna, in other words, when you crush the olive, it brings fruitful results, and that's when you get the pure oil out of the olive, the very same in a person's spiritual sense. Crushes himself, he goes out of his conveniences and his enjoyments and his pleasures. That is when he will succeed in the learning of Torah. So we see that the meaning of Torah has a very strong shaykhus to the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. That is the Rebbe went on, that it's related to what the Frierdiker Rebbe. But the Rebbe Rashad had a custom, his father, the Rebbe Miketz, had a custom that while the Neirus Hanukkah was still burning, he would always take a sefer and look into the sefer, and sit by the Menorah and look into the sefer and learn. But because naturally it was in a form that there was utter light in the room, because otherwise there's a thing that you're not allowed to have on Neirus and the Neirus Hanukkah. If there would be no other light in the room, just the Neirus Hanukkah, you wouldn't be allowed to look into the sefer from the light of the Neirus Hanukkah. However, naturally it was in perfect accordance with halacha, and he would always sit by the Neirus Hanukkah and look into a sefer. Why? For the same reason. Because the Yom Tov of Hanukkah has a very strong sefer for Torah. It's added that this is an opportune time to again alert. So we have spoken about it many, many times, but to see to it that those reading that is yet do not have a sefer to the Sefer Torah that are currently being written. for whatever reason they won't reach it, they should be associated together with the other tens and hundreds of thousands of Jews that are being united in these Sefer Tevos that are currently written. Most appropriate time now again to reach out to these Jews and see to it that they will gain atheists in the Sefer Tevos. Then the Rebbe went on in the Farbrengen and said that there is an inyan which he would like to discuss. Because the Rebbe, the inyan is of great interest. And he says that the inyan in itself is worthy to make a special Farbrengen just because of this inyan. It's not to make a special Farbrengen, because it's me. And the Farbrengen, he should have given this inyan priority and spoken about it in the first piece. Then the Rebbe says, unfortunately, there are those who, then it's not much of a difference whether he talks about it in the first piece or he talks about it in the third piece, because they are busy sleeping. Furthermore, he says there are those that are sleeping that they may not be sleeping with closed eyes, and may be in a category of sleeping with the Farbrengen with open eyes. But nonetheless, the inyan is of extreme importance. And the Rebbe refers to this inyan with an expression, Yeretan to Yisrael be. But it says at least this inyan should have an effect on himself. And he hopes the Rebbe says that it will have an effect not only on himself, but it will have an effect on the participants in the Farbrengen as well. The Rebbe said that this inyan was alerted on this inyan. Someone that wrote in the letter, he says somebody not from this country, somebody from from an outside country, somebody usually frequently does not write in such type of comments. However, this inyan, the Rebbe says the person did bring to his attention. The Rebbe went on that the chlau, the Negeya teaching, the Negeya case, in other words, to look for a period of when the coming in of Mashiach will be, the chlau, we do not look for such type of things. And the Rebbe says, when we look into the Rambam, where the Rambam tells us what's going to transpire when Mashiach will come, the first the Rambam uses several general inyan in what's going to be. The Rambam tells us the sequence, how it's going to take place. After the Rambam says that, the Rambam goes on and says that the chlau, we should not get involved in all the other details. So what we see from this is that these details that the Rambam tells us, and these in which we have clear, this is without any doubt, without any question, because the Rambam has told us that the inyanim will be taking place in such type of an order. The Geula will come, and the Kabbalah for Yisrael, Yaakov for Yisrael, Alachas B'derech HaTorah, and so forth. All the inyanim which the Rambam tells us in detail. If we look in the Gemara, the Rebbe says, there's Mesechtes Sanhedrin, there's also, that is the main area where the Gemara discusses what the world is going to be like when Mashiach will come. So we find it in the Gemara as well. As far as in Torah, there are psukim in Parshas Balak, which are explained in the Gemara and are explained in Zohar that have a shaykhus from Mashiach. But if we want to look in Tanakh and Torah Nevi'im Maksuvah, for an area where we really find the inyanim of Mashiach, and the inyanim of Geula, and the inyanim of Faith to be discussed really at length, we find these inyanim in the Sefer of the Niyah. In Sefer of the Niyah, in Tanakh, there's a lot which is there to discuss these inyanim that have the shaykhus to what the world is going to be like, and Ramazan and Kitchen in the Mashiach will come. Because we find in Sefer Daniel, in the beginning of Kapitel Yud Beis, in the beginning of Kapitel Yud Beis, there's a passage. Of the Eisahu, they be on that time, Yamed Michael HaSar HaGodel, Ha'omed Al-Bnei HaMecha, Michael, who is the big star, the big leader, in charge of all Yidden, for Hoysei Sarah Shalomiyashem Yoyz Day Ada Eisaveh. It will be a time, an unpleasant time in Eish Sarah, that was never such a bad time equivalent to this type of time. And the passage goes on. Obe'esahu, Yimolet Amcha, Kel Hanim Shokosov B'Sefer. If you look into Mephorshim, and there's Mephorshim and Tanakh, the Kiddush David, Abin Esad Yedon, And these type of Mefarshim, the Rebbe says, are Mefarshim which are quoted in Chassidus. The Zohar is quoted a lot in Chassidus. The Meshajigon is quoted in Chassidus. And the Meshajigon is known that he was from the very first that was involved in the whole idea of Sittim, of looking for a time when Mashiach will come and finding appropriate years when we should hope for the coming of Mashiach. So when we look into these Mefarshim, and the Chlau, the Rebbe spoke earlier, that the time now, the times we are living in now, the Rebbe uses the expression, it's a time that the very faithful for. The situation in the world is extremely shaky, and extremely unstable, and extremely unwanted situation. The Rebbe says this is realized. This is realized not only by Yiddish, but even non-Jews as well also realize that the time, the era we're living in the world today is an extremely unpleasant time in the world. What does the Pasuk conclude? Kol hanim shekosel b'sefer. There'll come such a time, it will be Kol hanim shekosel b'sefer. And we're talking about we're using the term of sefer. What does sefer apply to usually? Naturally, by using when we use the expression sefer applies to the idea of sefer. So here we have a remez. There will come a time. There will be a time right before the coming of Mashiach. This time will be defined as such a time as Sarah Shalomiyah some years ago at the Eishavei. What will be the appropriate thing to do in this time? That the Sarah Gadol, ha'emet al Bnei Amecha, the Sarah Gadol is in charge of Yidden. What will he do in his time, and how will he guide Yidden in this time? What should be done? Kol hanim shekosel b'sefer. The Rebbe concluded. The Rebbe said when he was thinking whether to relate this Indian or not, because he feels that it's his responsibility that he must make mention of this Indian. Because if he wouldn't mention this Indian to us, the Rebbe says he would feel that he's carrying the chayus on himself, not mentioning this Indian, this remez, which was brought to his attention. It was brought to his attention, but again, if you look carefully, it's in Kapitel Yud Beis, as Sefer Daniel, and it's an open passage in this Sefer. Later in the Farbrengen, the Rebbe kept on stressing that today is a combination of three inyanim. It's Chodesh, and the Rebbe went back to it later again. It's Chodesh, it's Hanukkah, and it's Pesach Miketz. And that is why in the reading of the Torah today, we took out three Sifrei Torah. Because the Chlau, it's not too common and not too often that three Sifrei Torah should be taken out. And today it did happen. Because when we read the Kriya of Pesach Miketz, the other one we read the Kriya of Chodesh, as well as the Kriya that has a Shaykhah to Hanukkah. And all this was done with one master, with one Torah, and with one Ataharecha, which is said before we take out the Sefer Torah, we say Ataharecha Ladas. It was one Ataharecha Ladas which was said on all these three Sefer Torah which were taken out. And the number of three is something which stands for a very strong union. Here the Rebbe refers to the passage of Hayonu Miyamayim. Hayonu Ashlishi Yisumenu V'Michya Lefanav. And what is the truth of the Hayonu Ashlishi? Which refers to the time of the coming of Mashiach. And here we have a tremendous union with three Sefer Torah are being read and are being used on one time. The Rebbe went on, but if we look carefully, the three inyanim which we have today, one we have as the Kriyas of Chodesh. Kriyas of Chodesh has a Shaykhah to Levana. One we have as the Kriyas B'Shabbos. The Kriyas B'Shabbos has a Shaykhah to Yemei Chachama. That is a result of sun. That's how the union of the counting of the days go. And then we have the third union is Hanukkah. Hanukkah, the Rebbe says, is a combination of both. It has to do with the Kriyas of Yemei Chodesh, as well as this Yemei Chodesh, this jumper is set into 8 days of Yemei Shavuot. Here the Rebbe went into a meaning that on one hand we find that there's a big Mila in Milan B'Kodesh. This is the whole idea of Hanukkah. That Hanukkah constantly keeps on demanding from us. Milan B'Kodesh, how when it comes to a Yom Kippur, we are constantly supposed to keep on going higher and higher. Then the Rebbe says, on the other hand, we find an expression of Reishi, of not changing, which obviously, it says these two inyanim are contradicting one another. On one hand, we are demanding that he is supposed to be a Milan B'Kodesh. He's supposed to be going higher and higher in tradition. And on the other hand, there's an union which discusses the mile of Leif Nisi of not changing. I'll explain there are two in them. For example, the union of Kabbalah Sale in a person. Kabbalah Sale means the dedication of acceptance of the yoke of the Rebbe. This union of Kabbalah Sale, the Rebbe says, here we are supposed to stand on a level of Leif Nisi of not changing. In other words, a person constantly has to be under this pressure of having the yoke of Torah mitzvahs on himself, the yoke of the Rebbe on himself. The Megillah, are there in Yemen Kate? There's a union of Mailam the Kodesh of constantly keeping on going higher and higher. Here the Rebbe explained the very smart. Rebbe refers times when we approach another youth. And we are approaching this other youth to bring the light of Hanukkah, the light of Nea Mitzvah, the Torah to this youth. Obviously, we are in a position that we are doing this person a favor. Because we're helping him spiritually, we're assisting him spiritually, so we're doing him a favor. It's a total curse. It is totally not so. On the contrary, the Rebbe has given us an opportunity, and the Rebbe is doing us a favor, that we should be able to be in a position to help another youth. Who is this other youth? Let us not forget what our Rebbe teaches us in Tanya and Torah, Lamed Beis, who the other youth is. That each and every youth is part of the Rebbe. And as the Rebbe stresses, Hinei Hashem, Mitzav Allah, that the Rebbe is standing on top of him, and Mabit Allah, the Breichin, Kloyes, the Leiv, Ha'oid, the Karoi, which is a court of time. So the Rebbe is constantly observing this person. We are talking about a person who is a Ben Melech, who is a prince, or can even be categorized as a Melech himself, because this is every youth, Kol Yisrael, B'nai Malach Amen, O Malach Amen. In Mela, we have an opportunity to help, to assist a prince of the Rebbe. Now, the Rebbe goes ahead. The Rebbe is a Roisei Chalbasher and Asilasher. The Rebbe can heal everyone. This is what we say daily. If the Rebbe can bring healing to everyone, can cure everyone physically, the Rebbe can naturally cure everyone spiritually as well. However, we are doing this, we are given this opportunity to be able to assist another youth. Not the fact we're doing this other youth favor. The Rebbe has given us, in other words, we're not supposed to look down to this other youth whom we are assisting right now. On the contrary, the Rebbe has done us a favor. The Rebbe has given us an opportunity that we should be able to assist the person who is part and parcel of the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is observing all this because the Rebbe is Mabit Allah, the Breichin, Kloyes, the Rebbe is constantly observing what is going on with each and every youth. However, the Rebbe wants to do us a favor. And the Rebbe wants to give us an opportunity that we should be able to assist the Ben Melech, we should be able to assist his prince and bring him back to the proper. As the famous muscle of a prince was whisked away back to the palace. However, he's still a prince, but at the same time he doesn't know the route back to the palace. So we are given this opportunity, this Rebbe, they refer to the Friedrich Rebbe, that we are given this slichus, we are doing this as an emissary of the Friedrich Rebbe who has given us this task, that we should reach out to each and every youth. However, we have to realize this great opportunity we have, not to look down on the youth that we are assisting, but on the contrary, we have to look up and appreciate and cherish this fact that we can be in a position of bringing hope and assistance to the youth. The Rebbe learned a Rashi today's Farbrengen. The Rebbe learned the Rashi in this Farbrengen as well as interpreted in the Zohar with the commentaries of his father, the Megillah this week's Chazarah. While the Rebbe was talking, the Rebbe was talking about the things which are demanded in these generations. The previous generations may have not excelled in these inyanim. Those previous generations naturally were perfect as far as inyanim of Yerushalayim is concerned. The Rebbe said that there was a response given as far as what is the accomplishment of the introduction of Chassidus, something which previous generations didn't have, and were able to exist fine without it. And now the generation has to come on to the learning and teaching of Chassidus. Now there are many, many explanations and parables given on this. But the Rebbe referred today to an explanation which was given that without Chassidus needing our life, a bat of candles. However, the candles are not shining. The candles are not lit. The koyach, and naturally here we're referring to as a box of candles. Nisham, every yid is a candle. However, what is the koyach of Chassidus? To bring light to all these candles, to see that all these candles should be lighting, all these candles should be lit and illuminated, and not only be illuminating for their own selves, but to be able to bring light into their entire environment. First of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was talking about the greatness of Torah and the power that Torah has. And the Rebbe referred to an episode which took place by the Chazarah. The Chazarah was known for his greatness and learning, but the Chazarah got a statement in the mail on the tax which he had to pay. The Rebbe says this took place in Russia, and such type of a government, the Bolshevik government, and he asked his grandson who was around to explain to him in detail what the statement was referring to. So his grandson explained to him that there are various types of taxes which this statement reflects. One tax and another tax. So whoever who lived in Torah and all his inyanim were Torah, home is here for Torah. So whoever looked for a mocker in Torah for this taxes. Because if there's a mocker in Torah for it, then Dina de Malchusik in it, then we have to live up to the rules and regulations of the government, and actually you have to pay. So he started breaking up the various types of taxes. He says, for this tax, he finds a mocker. However, for the other tax, he does not find a mocker in Torah. So, and that's where we're left it at. A few days later, a different notice came in the mail, saying that the previous statement, which listed several types of taxes which they had to pay, which the Chazarah had to pay, was an error, and he does not have to pay all those types of taxes. It's only one of them which he has to pay. The one which the Chazarah mentioned a few days earlier, that this one he realizes that Torah also gives recognition to such type of tax, and the based on that, Dina de Malchusik Dina will have to follow it and pay it. However, the other taxes he sees no source in Torah, the Mela he sees no need that he will have to pay it. But it says, here we see the greatness of Torah. And we also have to take into consideration what type of government the Chazarah lived under. We're talking about the Russian communist government, who is a government which is far from taking into recognition the Yemen of Torah. But if Torah has such strong power that when it comes to an authority like the Chazarah, ultimately it was accomplished that the taxes he felt do not have an oath in Torah. There's no human Torah that says that these taxes have to be paid. So he got a statement several days later saying that he doesn't have to pay those taxes. Of course, the Farbrengen, the Rebbe was referring very strongly about recently what the reform movement is trying to introduce, and that even children that are being born from various mothers, if the father is a Jew, the child should be considered a Jew. The Rebbe referred to it very strongly, and the Rebbe said it cannot be so. The Rebbe also referred to it as the Chazarah said that there is a Yid always remains a Yid. However, when is it possible that from a youth to turn out into a goy, a youth to bring a goy in this world? If the only possibility is that's when he's born al-anochis, and there's intermarriage to a goya, and this goy gives birth to a child from the Jewish husband, and then this child is considered a goy. Like I said, there's no room anywhere in the Torah to debate this. And this is a meaning with Torah, and this is so, and nobody could go ahead and change it. I mean, any child that's born from a non-Jewish mother, though the father may be Jewish, the child is definitely considered a goy. And the Indian, the Rebbe says here, it's also an opportune time to talk about the great importance of the Indian of New Yehudi. The Rebbe says, whenever he talks about these inyanim, it is known that he never mentions people or inyanim by name. This is his way of always addressing himself to these types of inyanim. But the Rebbe says there are those that does not realize the great importance in the Indian of New Yehudi, and they underestimated it. He says, the reports that were brought back to him now are, and he knows it could be documented, and it is so that if the Torah led to Gila Arayos, Shulchan and Avodah Zarah. And he says it's so unfortunate that the Indian of New Yehudi wasn't taken care of, and isn't being taken care of properly. Because there are those that are still reluctant whether New Yehudi should be taken care of. The Rebbe says that there are yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael today that have these type of geirim in the yeshiva, In other words, these Gerim are not Gerim in any way whatsoever. These are Mamis Gerim Gemurah. The Rebbe says the yeshivas were originally founded by such founders that had the best intentions to found the yeshiva, and the yeshivas were founded with the utmost feeling of Ahavas Yisrael, and never had any Chalila side intention when they were Meyatek, when they founded these type of institutions. However, now things have gone so out of hand that Gerim, from Isgairus to Leika Halacha, have came into these institutions, and the results are the favorites in Yenim of Gila Aroya, and have a desire, because these people are Mamis Goyim Gemurah. I mean, there is no room to say that these people are Yidden. They are Goyim, total Goyim. And here they come into these type of institutions where they are looked at and treated as Yidden. And the Rebbe says the consequences, the results that come out of these in Yemen, it's endless. There's no way to describe how unwanted and unacceptable these consequences are. And the Rebbe again urged that we should not underestimate the importance of correcting the new Yehudi and amending this law, because it's something which can lead such a soul into extremely terrible inyan. The Rebbe learned the commentary of Rabbi Yitzchak of the Svara is a Zohar which discusses how Yosef treated his brothers. Rebbe said that his father generally does not elaborate in the comments on the Zohar. He only writes the inyanim which he feels are utmost to be written, because it is known that when his father wrote the comments on the Zohar, he did not have enough ink with him. He wrote it around the Gilyonis of the Sefer HaZohar which he had, and he wrote it with the ink which the Rebbe's mother hand manufactured and got it over to him to be able to write brief ha'oref, brief comments on the Zohar. So that is why the Rebbe says there are many inyanim which obviously also require interpretation and explanation. However, the Tzvara felt that whatever can be self-explanatory, he did not comment on it. And this is the Zohar which discusses how come that Yosef mistreated his brother. The Zohar raises the question, there's a pasuk, "V'nefoi le'yitzchal tisma, u'bekos le'ayogel lebecha." When your enemy falls, don't be happy, don't be joyous about it. Or when he slips, don't let your heart be happy. So based on this, the Zohar asks, how is it that when his brothers didn't know that this was Yosef was mistreating them so, obviously this falls into the category of B'nafela Yitzchal Tismach B'kesle Al-Yogel Lebecha. And together with this, the Zohar also, the page is looking for it. The Zohar also asks this question based on another source. So the Rebbe asks, why does the Zohar have to bother with this question from two angles? Number one, from the Nefela Yisra Al Kismach, and then the Zohar asks it from another mocker. Obviously, the fact of not being happy when your enemy isn't a problem, this is sufficient enough reason to raise a question why Yosef treated his brothers in such a way. He created a lot of problems for them and created a lot of inconveniences for them. The Rebbe explains, based on what's explained in the Zohar, that Yosef really could not take any nekam on them. Definitely did not come as a result of the Nefela Yisra, he should be happy, or because lo yogel libay, chas v'shov. Definitely not. However, Yosef realized the great crime which his brothers did. And Yosef, being a tzaddik, saw what it's going to lead to. He saw that in later generations there will be a problem with Asarei Harugei Malchus, and all this will come as a result of his brothers not treating him properly. And mainly Yosef was looking for means besides the fact that Yosef wanted to bring Binyamin to Mitzrayim, so the only way he saw that he would be able to convince them to get Binyamin down was to get him involved in such type of setup. But besides that, Yosef was looking for means to create for them a situation that should be considered a trigger for the crime that they did by selling Yosef. And then the Rebbe goes ahead. The Rebbe explains that trigger mustn't necessarily be that the person should do a minyan, and by doing this thing he will try to correct an avla which he did some time ago. Could very well be that certain situations, for example, Yosef wanted to cause them inconveniences, and they suffer that much agmas nefesh, and they'll suffer that much unwanted inyanim, so this already should stand for forgiveness for the avla that they did. Now the Rebbe was there to explain, in the Zayah cannot just ask, based on the pasuk, the Nefela Yitzchak Tisma, the Tekra Yoga Ledecha, and the Zayah should ask the question, if that's the case, how come Yosef was able to do so to his brothers? Chas v'sholem, Yosef didn't do it mitzadat. Yosef definitely didn't do it because he was happy that his brothers were no problem. Yosef was doing it because Adarabah, he wanted to assist his brothers and see to it that they should get forgiveness for the wrongdoing which they did. The Negei, the Pirush Rashi which the Rebbe learned, he learned the Rashi in this week's Chazarah and Parshas Miketz. Which discusses about the Psukim where the Shvatim came to buy food in Mitzrayim. It's Kapitim in Aleph, Pasuk Nun Vav. V'arav haya al kol pnei haaretz. It was a hunger in the entire land of Egypt, the entire world. Vayishtach Yosef es kol asher behem, vayizber leMitzrayim. Vayechzak harav ba'aretz Mitzrayim. And that is when Yosef opened his oisres, whatever Yosef possessed, and went ahead, provided everybody with proper food. We look into Rashi, vayizber leMitzrayim. The Rashi comments, Sever, Rashi is looking to type up the meaning of the word Sever, and explains Sever is lesson mecher, the lesson kinyan. It's a lesson of buying, and it's a lesson of selling. The same word Sever can be applied when one buys, and the same word Sever can be applied when one sells. Kan, here in this case, Mishamesh lesson mecher. Yosef sold to the Mitzrayim fruit. There's a pasuk, Shivru lanu ma'at oichel, buy for us a little bit of food. There the expression shaver, shivru, which is the same word, is lesson kinyan, is a lesson of buying. And Rashi goes ahead, V'al teima, don't you say, einoi ki'im b'tzvua, that this expression of shivru can be applied for trading, buying or selling, only by tzvua, only by grain. She'af b'yayin v'chalot, also by yayin and by cholad, by wine and by milk, we also find the same expression, Martino. Ulachu shivru belay kesef, or belay mechir yayin v'cholad. We find the pasuk in Yeshaya, which also applies the word shivru to the purchase of wine and milk. Rabbi took the Rashi apart with many questions. Basically, what Rashi wants to do is for the child who is learning Chumash, Rashi wants to translate and give him to understand what the word Vayizber means. Fine. So if Rashi wants to type up Vayizber, Rashi should have just quoted the word Vayizber and typed that what does Vayizber mean here? Vayizber here means the lesson of purchasing. Why does Rashi have to get involved? Selling himself. Why does Rashi have to get involved in saying the holiness? That it means, at times it can mean buying, at times it can mean selling. Where is the word applied as buy? Shivru lo no ma'ateichel. Shivru lo no ma'ateichel is not here. That's a weiter, 2 kapitlach weiter in the text. So when the child will get up to 2 kapitlach weiter, that is when Rashi will interpret him and introduce him that shivru can also be used not only for selling, for purchasing, but it can also be used for buying. Furthermore, why does Rashi have to get involved here and quote a pasuk in Yeshaya and tell us that the lesson of shivru can be applied not only to the purchase and selling of grain, but it can also be applied to yayin v'cholad? The child is learning Chumash. We're talking about a Chumash mitzvah who as yet does not have any knowledge in the pasuk in Yeshaya, so there is no need to make mention the flower of the pasuk in Yeshaya when Rashi is telling us stop here in the pasuk in Parshas Bereshit, in Chumash Bereshit and Parshas Miketz. Basically, what the Rebbe explained, to learn stop in this Rashi is a style. That the emes, when the child is approaching this pasuk and coming to the word in in the pasuk, Vayizber in the time, the child would really use a completely different type. He would type Vayizber, as we already had in Chumash Bereishis, the word Vayizber, and there by Loit, when Loit had the guest, and there the lashon of Vayizber means to break. So the child is learning from this here. If not for Rashi commenting anything, we would type here also to break. What shaykhs does breaking have here when we're talking Vayizber and Mitzrayim? It would mean perfect. It would mean that Yosef had enough food and supply that he would be able to break the hunger. As we say in the Chodesh, we say in Borchi Nafsi, the Kapitel Tillim which we recite on the Chodesh and the Chodesh Dika Davening, and there's a passage which uses the word Vayizber. The word Vayizber is used where it applies to the breaking of the hunger. Yizberu Troyim Smam, they will break their thirst. So we see if the word Yizberu could be applied to breaking the thirst, it could be used to can be applied as well to breaking the hunger. So if Rashi wouldn't tell us anything, this is how we would type to Yizberu. However, Rashi feels that this is not the type of Yizberu. Yizberu here is a type, it means a lesson of purchasing. Selling, lesson mecha. So Mela Rashi is giving us a complete introduction to the whole parsha, that wherever we will find here the lesson of Vayizber, it can be applied as either the lesson of purchasing or either as a lesson of selling. So right away Rashi gives us a whole introduction that when we will have the expression Shivru lanu ma'ateicha, it is lesson 2. Rabbi raised several questions b'teicha in. The Rabbi asked that Shivru could have also meant Meloshin Chayra, Meloshin dealing. And the child also understands that when a merchant deals, he not necessarily always buys, he has to sell. Or vice versa, he can't always sell, he has to buy. And the Rebbe is asking, so let us apply here the lesson of Vayizber, and it's trying that it should have the shaykhs to the concept of Secher of Yitzchak. And the Rebbe went on to explain that is why Rashi is quoting here the pasuk. Shivru lanu ma'at oichel, lesson 2. Yankov expressed himself, go ahead and buy for us ma'at oichel, buy for us a little bit of food. Rebbe said, if we would keep talking here in handle, in business you don't use an approach of buying a little bit of food. For example, when find the expression where Parai use the expression that ha'aretz l'fneichen, shvu is charua. Go ahead and handle. You have an open land, or the country is open to you, go ahead and do business in it. So we see that when we want to use an approach of dealing, of buying and selling in terms of business, then buying and selling in terms of business is usually not in a limited way. It's not in a limited way in a format of ma'at or abyssal fakir period, an open land. The land is open to you, go ahead and do business. That's a proper approach when we want to type as mitzvah. So Mamela Rashi has to come on to quote Shivru lanu ma'at eichel lesson kinyan. It's like a format of buying and selling, what the pasuk is talking about here. But it's not a buying and selling, which is a business type buying and selling. It's the buying and selling that's applying to the hunger here. That Yosef was out to, was providing food, selling food, so that the people should be able to have what to eat, and at the same time people were coming there and purchasing food. It's a lesson kinyan factor. But what type of a lesson kinyan? It's a lesson kinyan which is used in a pasuk of Shivru lanu ma'at eichel. The name ma'at eichel is not a mitzvah type of kinyan. It's not a business type of purchase. It's a type of purchase which is limited. So people to supply, when they went out to purchase food, to supply their own needs as far as quieting their own hunger. The Rebbe also raised, why can't we type Vayizber should stem from the word Seder, meaning food. And the Rebbe says this is a common practice in Chumash which the child already knows about, because we have learned right away, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es ha'aretz, so the child knows what the types of shamayim. Shamayim is composed of two words, sham, mayim. So the child right away, as he begins learning Chumash, has an understanding that there's a way to approach a type, that a type in a Hebrew word is composed of two words. Mamela, why can't we type here Seder should mean Tvua? Bo meaning Tvua. That's why Rashi goes on weiter. The Al-Tema ain't in the Tvua, because here they weren't only limited to the purchase of Tvua. Being that they were buying, as the Pasuk uses the expression, not only they were buying foods which fall into the category of Tvua, which are limited to Tvua. They buy all types of food supplies. That's why Rashi has to quote a Pasuk in Yeshaya. In the Tvua, to add the Yayin the Chalav Matino, because by Yayin the Chalav we also find an expression of the food Yayin the Chalav. Because Rashi wants to tell us that the type of purpose which everybody was coming to Mitzrayim to buy, and which Yosef was selling, wasn't only Bog, which Bog would be translated as food. It was a type of purchase which was a general terminology of all types of food. And they were not the pshat that Rashi is telling us how to type the pasuk in Yeshaya. The child here is learning Chumash. He's learning Chumash Parshas Miketz. We're not looking how to type the pasuk in Yeshaya. But we have to come on to this pasuk to have a better understanding what the Yizber here means. That what type of food was purchased, not only ball was purchased, not only food, but all types of food, whatever a person needs. To fulfill his needs as far as providing his needs for eating all the items he needed, the gam, chat, the Yisracha, as the person uses the expression elsewhere. This is what people came to Mitzrayim to buy, and this is what Yosef had to say. And maybe that is why Rashi has to get involved into this whole Arichas and come on to the pasuk of Yeshaya as well, and Rashi titles is by Yizber. It's not a meaning of dealing. It doesn't mean a meaning of secher. It doesn't mean a meaning of mischa. It means by Yizber, it means a limited type of purchase in a format as Rashi himself quotes right away into here. Lashon Kinyan, it's like a lesson of buying, but buying not out Nischa, but it's a buying where people came down to Mitzrayim to provide their needs, and they came to purchase whatever they will need as far as food. There was a hunger, and this was the only area where they were able to get whatever they needed. So that is why Rashi has to type here the Vayizber. Rashi has to quote. Because of the Me'at. Because here we see that it's not because otherwise we would mean that Rashi types Seder, Kinyan, Mecher, als Mishcha. So the Ma'at Eichel excludes this shot, that it cannot mean als Mishcha, but it means simply that people came down to Mitzrayim to get all their needs. Okay, thank you. But that's where the expression is used, that it's an open type of business, so again, without any type of limitation. However, here we see a limitation, so we see that it's only a type of purchase for personal needs. Regarding the Rebbe spoke about the beginning of chapter Yud in Sefer Daniel, which has a remez that a time we can call Hakosov the Sefer, and the Rebbe refers to the commentary of Metzudas David as well as the commentary of Rasad, Rabbi Nesad Yegoyen. They interpret that Kol HaKosov the Sefer applies to tzaddikim. However, the Rebbe said, first of all, this can apply to all of Klal Yisrael based on the Amir Kulam tzaddikim. That even if should we learn a different stuff, and we should not learn according to the Pshat of the Metzudas David and Rabbi Nesad Yegoyen, it still serves as a remez that a time will come when Kol HaKosov the Sefer, anyone who has an oath in Sefer Torah, this will be a rescue for them when there will be a need for it, when Tar HaGod will be Yisrael, will come up and say that Kol HaKosov the Sefer, this is a rescue for everyone that has an oath in Sefer Torah. I'm just correcting this because in the text he said that the Metzudas David as well as the Rabbi Nesad Yegoyen learned Pshat that this applies to Sefer Torah. They learned Pshat that this applies to tzaddikim, and this is how the Rebbe said in the Farbrengen that it applies to tzaddikim. But again, the Rebbe added on, it's tzaddikim that we can interpret it that it applies to all of Klal Yisrael based on the Amir Kulam tzaddikim, or else we can learn that it still serves as a remez that Kol HaKosov the Sefer, generally Sefer, refers to Sefer Torah.